We tend to imagine that the worst things in the settled systems came from somewhere else. That horror is a visitor, that it crosses the dark uninvited, finds us, and that our only part in the story is to endure it, and if we are very lucky, to walk away with the light still on. It is a soothing arrangement, because it keeps us clean. The monster gets to be the monster. We get to be the ones it happened to. Far past the trade lanes, though, in a system almost no one has a reason to visit, a single ship keeps a different version of events. Its name is the Colander, and the dead aboard it did not stumble into anything. They made a choice. Something had come aboard with them out of the dark, and rather than end it while they still could, they chose to keep it. And that choice is the thing the rest of us have spent a long time refusing to look at directly. The horror of that ship was never the thing waiting in the lower decks. The horror is that someone stood in front of the most dangerous creature they had ever seen and thought a single, very human word. Mine. To find the Colander, you have to want to. It hangs in the Schrodinger system, off to the east of Cheyenne and the heavy gravity of Leviathan, in a pocket of space that the ordinary flow of commerce simply curves around. The trade ships do not pass this way. There is no station here selling fuel and gossip, no settlement counting its days, no reason for a route to bend toward it. You make the jumps deliberately, system after system, until the map runs thin and the names grow strange, and somewhere in that thinning you begin to understand that you are leaving the part of the galaxy that keeps records of itself. Out here, things can happen and simply not be witnessed. That is the first quiet fact the Colander teaches, before you have even seen it. Some places are dangerous not because of what they contain, but because no one is looking. And then it is there, in orbit above Schrodinger III, a vessel of real size, larger than a freighter has any need to be, drifting with the particular stillness of a thing that has stopped expecting to be answered. You try to hail it. The hail goes nowhere. No automated beacon, no distress loop, no warning to keep clear. Just a ship turning slowly against the curve of a planet that no one named for anything kind, holding its silence the way a held breath holds a room. The only way to learn anything is to go aboard, and the moment you commit to that, the encounter changes its shape. You are no longer a traveler passing a wreck. You are a witness arriving very, very late. Inside, the first thing the Colander gives you is a body. She is just past the threshold, intact, unbothered by whatever ended her, a woman named Magali V, lying where she fell with a slate still close at hand. The slate is titled with the flat honesty of someone who has run out of better words, Our Last Resort. Read it, and you understand that you have walked in at the end of a long story rather than the start of a short one. The crew knew. Whatever killed them, they had named it, feared it, and tried to wall it off, and the document she carried into her last minutes was not a warning to outsiders, but a confession to themselves, an account of a decision already made and already failing. The ship around her body is dark in the way that only a ship can be dark, where the failure of light is also the failure of everything light depends on. The main power is gone. What remains crawls along on backup, enough to keep a few terminals breathing and a few doors honest, enough to throw shadows that move when you do. Systems that should hum sit cold. The recycled air has the heaviness of a place where the machines that clean it have long since given up. You move through it the way you would move through a cathedral that has lost its faith, and at first the story it tells seems almost legible. A research vessel, a specimen, a containment that did not hold. It is a familiar shape of tragedy, and there is comfort in familiar shapes. They let you file the dead under accident and move on. That comfortable reading is exactly the one the Colander is built to take away from you, because the deeper you go, the more it becomes clear that nothing here was an accident at all. The slates are scattered the way real grief scatters things, in bunks, on workbenches, beside the beds of people who were writing to no one in particular because there was no one left to write to. Taken together, they are not a logbook. They are a slow recording of a mind making excuses, the collective voice of a crew talking itself out of the truth one entry at a time. And the truth, when you assemble it from the pieces, has a clear and terrible beginning. It begins in the vents. A maintenance worker named Billy Kay is the one who first puts it into words. During an ordinary check, he hears something in the ventilation system, a sound that does not belong to any machine he is responsible for, a movement in the spaces between rooms. He notes it the way people note the first symptom of an illness they are determined not to have, almost casually, almost as a joke. He mentions in passing that the Colander might have picked up something it should not have. An interloper, he calls it. An interloper from XL-069. The word will turn out to be the most accurate thing anyone aboard ever writes, and at the moment he writes it, he does not believe it matters at all. This is the texture of the disaster that the logs preserve, and it is far worse than a sudden catastrophe would have been. There was no single night when everything fell. There was a sound in the vents, and then there were malfunctions in the life support, small ones, the kind a competent crew fixes and forgets. There was the better part of a month between the first reported trouble and the lockdown that sealed the ship's fate. A month. Long enough to leave. Long enough, again and again, to decide not to. You can follow that month through the people who lived it. A crewmate named Sarah P. left a terminal that speaks plainly about the thing aboard the ship and how it came to be trapped, the closest the Colander has to a clear-eyed account. There was a doctor, Amos S., whose notes carry the particular weight of someone who understood the creature better than anyone aboard, and was therefore the least able to pretend. And there was the captain, Jahi J., whose quarters sit past the galley behind a sealed door, and whose terminal holds a message that has the airless quiet of someone speaking from inside a decision that can no longer be reversed. These were not careless people. They were specialists. That is the part that should keep you up at night. The Colander did not die because its crew were fools. It died because intelligent, capable people, watching the evidence accumulate in front of them, kept choosing the explanation that let them stay. So the horror of the Colander is not the moment of the killing. We arrive expecting the killing to be the point, and it is there, certainly, waiting in the dark below. But the logs reveal that the real wound was older and slower. It was the month of small reassurances. It was the gap between what they were seeing and what they were willing to say. By the time the creature stopped being a sound in the vents and became a presence in the corridors, the choice that doomed them was already long behind them, fossilized in a dozen entries that all say, in their different ways, the same thing. It is under control. We have time. We can manage this. And not all of them agreed. Somewhere in that wreckage is the voice of the one who did not. A crew member who left behind a record with a title that needs no decoding, a flat little phrase that amounts to nothing more than the words, "Told you so." It is the loneliest document on the ship. Here was someone who saw the shape of the thing early, who said it out loud, who watched the others nod and reassure each other and go back to their stations, and who understood before the end that being right was not going to be the same as being saved. That single dissenting voice is what seals off the last comfortable exit from the story. We would like to believe the crew simply could not see what was coming, that the disaster was a kind of blindness. But at least one of them saw it perfectly and said so, and it changed nothing at all. The Colander did not die for lack of a warning. It died because a warning on a ship already committed to its own hope was just one more inconvenient thing easier to manage than to heed. And underneath even that, there is the question the early logs only circle, the one that turns the Colander from a tragedy into something closer to a verdict. Because the creature in the vents did not invade the ship. The crew brought it there. This is where the story stops being about a containment failure and becomes about a kind of hunger. The thing aboard the Colander was not a predator that boarded a passing vessel and found a feast. It came aboard small, young enough to contain, young enough to handle, and the crew, by every indication their records leave behind, chose not to destroy it. They kept it, not studied at arm's length, and released, kept. And reading the entries against one another, the inference becomes difficult to avoid. They wanted to see how large it could grow. Read the entries with that knowledge, and they curdle. The talk of containment was never the talk of frightened people trying to survive a mistake. At the beginning, it was the talk of confident people managing an asset. The logs are open enough about money, about a cut, about profit, that the commercial motive needs no guessing. What has to be inferred is the rest, and the records lean toward it heavily, that the creature was not merely being held, but worked on. Based on what survives in those entries, it seems reasonable to read the project as an effort to make the thing deadlier rather than safer, because a weapon is worth more than a curiosity, and a perfected weapon is worth more than anything. The logs never quite say it in those words. They do not have to. The shape of the intention shows through the gaps between what was written down and what was carefully left out. Hold that against the slate in Magali V's hand, the one titled Our Last Resort, and it changes meaning entirely. The last resort was not some final clever stratagem against an external attacker. The last resort was the cage. The wall they finally threw up was a wall against the thing they themselves had taken in, contained, and, if the records are read the way they seem to want to be read, deliberately encouraged toward the very lethality that then turned on them. They did not lose control of an accident. They lost control of an intention. Even the name the ship gave it admits this, if you listen. They called it the Interloper, the intruder, the one who does not belong, the trespasser who came uninvited. It is the language of victims. But the interloper, in the only honest sense, was found and carried and confined by people who had every chance to leave it alone and chose instead to own it. The creature did not trespass into their lives so much as they trespassed into its existence, taking the thing that had drifted in from the dark and, instead of ending it, making it a prisoner, until its entire world was a wall and the people standing on the other side of it. When something raised in a cage finally breaks the cage, it is strange to call it the intruder. It was only ever doing the one thing that captivity guarantees. Eventually, it gets out. So when it got out, it did the work without urgency, which is the detail that lingers. It did not rampage. It disabled the systems that kept the crew alive. methodically, intelligently, turning the ship itself into the trap. It moved through the spaces the crew could not, the vents that had first betrayed its presence, becoming its private corridors. It took them, by the evidence, one at a time. A crewmate named Alex T. is remembered in the slates as one of the moments the containment failed, a death that marks the line between the period when they still believed they were managing a problem and the period when they understood they were prey. The crew sealed it into the laboratory at the heart of the ship, the last resort made literal, and then the life support gave out around them, and the terminal that should have reported survivors reports none. To reach that point, you have to go down, and going down is its own slow education in what the crew became. The upper deck still wears the shape of ordinary life, a workshop sealed behind a stubborn lock, its key left carelessly on a stand beside a bed, as if whoever set it there still expected to come back. A medical bay, its cabinets holding the small mercies of chems and bandages that were never going to be enough, and a doctor's terminal carrying the careful, deteriorating notes of someone cataloging the very thing that would kill them. Past the bunks, there is a hatch in the floor, and the hatch is the real threshold of the ship, the line between the part that was still pretending and the part that had stopped. Below it, the light thins to almost nothing. A narrow corridor runs toward a mainframe that, once woken, releases every sealed door at once, a final and useless generosity, opening a ship to no one. And back on the upper deck, in a vent where the cold air still moves, sits a cache of contraband, the quiet evidence of what this voyage had partly always been. Whatever else the Colander was, it was also a smuggler's errand, a vessel carrying things it did not want examined, run by people for whom the line between a specimen and a product had worn thin a long time ago. Stand at that life support console now, reading its flat refusal, and the architecture of the Colander rearranges itself in your mind. The whole vessel becomes legible as a single sentence written backward. The galley, the bunks, the personal terminals where people left their last unanswered words, all of it arranged around a room at the center that was built to hold the most important thing aboard, and it still holds it. That is the part that no walkthrough can quite prepare you for. The Colander is not a tomb that has finished its work. The creature the crew died to contain is still alive in the laboratory, still waiting in the dark below the hatch, an apex thing of such ferocity that few creatures in all the settled systems can match it. The cage held. The crew did not. The ship became a coffin for everyone except its single prisoner, and the prisoner is patient. It would be easy to leave the story there as a closed and self-contained nightmare, a clever, cruel little fable about a crew that reached too far and paid for it in full. But the Colander does not stay closed once you understand what its prisoner actually is, because the creature in that laboratory is not a unique monster, not a one-off horror invented by an unlucky voyage. By every measure that matters, by its form and its ferocity and the particular way it turns environments into weapons, it is a terrormorph. And the moment you name it that way, the wreck stops being an isolated tragedy and becomes a small, honest model of something the entire galaxy has been trying not to know. The Terrormorph is the apex of human nightmares in the settled systems, the creature that haunts the edges of every frontier story. And for a long time, the accepted understanding was the comfortable one, that these things are simply out there, a hazard of the dark, a natural terror that worlds occasionally produce. That understanding is a lie, and the truth of it is one of the heaviest secrets the powers of the galaxy have ever kept. The Terrormorph is not a simple product of the wild. It is bound up with a quiet apparatus of spread and control, with the recognition that something this lethal is not only a danger, but a resource, and with the long-buried history of people in positions of real power deciding that the most terrifying weapon imaginable is too valuable to leave ungrasped. The horror of the Terrormorph, in the end, is not that it exists. It is how much of its existence among us is the result of human choosing. Consider what is actually known about these creatures, and the privacy of the Colander begins to feel less like an exception and more like a single drawn sample. Scientists gave the species a name that does not bother with poetry: Oxysio Machina, the killing machine. And for generations the question of where they came from sat unanswered, because the answer was too inconvenient to chase. The truth, when it finally surfaced, was that the Terrormorph is not a separate horror at all, but the grown form of something everyone had already learned to ignore. The heat leech, that ubiquitous little pest that infests reactors and warm machinery and the guts of ships across the settled systems, the nuisance that travelers swat and forget about, is the Terrormorph in its infancy. They ride human vessels into freshly settled worlds, wait out the decades, and under the right conditions complete a change that no one was watching for. The deadliest predator humankind has ever met has been traveling in our cargo holds the entire time, wearing the disguise of something too small and too common to fear. And humankind, on learning this, did not recoil. It reached out, exactly as the Colander crew did, only with the resources of an empire. During the Colony War, the worst Terrormorph outbreak in recorded history fell on the city of Londinium, a swarm that broke through every defense raised to hold it, until a United Colonies admiral gave the order to bombard the spaceport from orbit and bury what was happening beneath rubble and silence. That silence was never only about the dead, it was about the program behind them, the decision made by people in clean uniforms in well-lit rooms that a creature this lethal was not a problem to be solved, but a weapon to be owned, an instrument of war worth cultivating and aiming at an enemy. The effort to forge the Terrormorph into the ultimate weapon ended the way these efforts always end. The thing they were building slipped every constraint they set for it, and it has been multiplying through the dark ever since, no longer anyone's tool, answerable to no one. The Colander crew, sealed in their forgotten room, were not amateurs fumbling at a horror they did not understand. Set the two stories side by side, and they rhyme. A private crew on a smuggler's ship and a government at war, both reaching for the same impossible ownership, both following the same logic toward the same end. The difference was only ever one of scale. There is one more thing these creatures are known to do, and it throws the whole long month of the Colander's denial into a colder light. A Terrormorph does not kill only with strength and speed. It pushes something into the air around it, a chemical influence that works directly on the human mind, breeding fear and confusion and turning people against their own judgment and against one another. Hold that against the record of a crew who watched the danger swell and kept insisting it was contained, who heard it moving in the vents and named it and still did not run, and a quieter, worse possibility begins to surface. We have been reading their month of excuses as a failure of nerve, a very human refusal to admit what they had done. But if that influence reached them through the walls of its cell, and with a creature like this one, it is fair to wonder whether it did, Then the thing they had caged was already loose inside their decisions, not merely behind a wall, but in the air they breathed and the false calm they clung to. On the evidence the ship leaves us, it becomes impossible to say where the crew's own denial ended and the creature's influence began, and that uncertainty is its own kind of horror. The Colander may not be only a story about people who would not see the truth. It may be a story about a truth that was quietly dismantling their ability to see it. Which is to say that the Colander was never an aberration. It was a confession in miniature. What that doomed crew did in the privacy of a ship no one was watching, capture the unthinkable, cage it, feed it, try to bend it toward profit and toward use, and die in the gap between their ambition and their control, is the same thing larger and more respectable hands have done at the scale of nations, behind better doors, with cleaner paperwork. The crew of the Colander were not uniquely monstrous. They were ordinary in the most damning way. They wanted to own the thing that could not be owned, and they paid the price that desire always eventually charges, and the only real difference between them and the architects of grander schemes is that the Colander left its records lying in the open for anyone willing to make the jumps to read. This is why the ship sits where it sits, and why that location stops feeling like an accident the longer you think about it. It drifts in the Schrodinger system, and it is hard not to hear in that name the old thought experiment about a thing that is neither alive nor dead until someone finally opens the box and looks. The Colander is exactly that box. For as long as no one travels out to it, the crew are not quite gone, and the verdict is not quite delivered. The disaster hangs in a kind of suspension, unwitnessed, undecided, a tragedy that has not yet been made true by anyone's attention. You are the one who opens it. You are the looking that collapses the suspension into fact. And what you find when you look is not only that the crew are dead, but that the thing they died to contain is alive, and that the cage they called a last resort is still doing the one job they got right. So the question that opened all of this comes back changed. It is tempting, walking those dark corridors, to ask what got loose, to treat the Colander as a story about a creature that escaped. But the creature never truly escaped. It is still there, sealed where they sealed it, exactly as caged in death as it was in life. The thing that got loose on the Colander was never the Terrormorph at all. It was the desire that put it in a cage to begin with. The conviction that a thing so dangerous it should not be touched was, for that very reason, worth owning. That desire moved through the crew like the creature moved through the vents, unseen at first, dismissed, indulged, until it had quietly disabled every system of judgment that might have saved them. The monster did its killing in a single sealed room. The hunger did its killing across an entire month, in the open, in plain language, in the steady voice of people explaining to themselves why it was fine. And here is what makes the Colander the most horrifying discovery in the settled systems, more than any single corpse or any patient predator in the dark. It is not that something terrible happened out there where no one was looking. It is that what happened is not strange. It is the ordinary shape of how we meet the things that are larger than us, not with awe, not with distance, but with the small, certain, fatal thought that if a thing is powerful enough, it must belong to someone, and that someone might as well be us. The crew of the Colander believed they had captured a weapon. What they had actually captured was a mirror, and the last thing each of them saw, in the failing light of a ship they had doomed with their own ambition, was their reflection finally getting free. The cage still holds. The stars out past the trade lanes keep their distance, and the Colander turns slowly above a world named for uncertainty, carrying its sealed room and its single living prisoner and its month of recorded excuses into a silence that no one is required to break. Somewhere in that silence is a question that the crew never managed to ask in time, and that the rest of us have not yet answered either. If the most dangerous thing in the galaxy is not the creature, but the certainty that we can hold it, then how many cages are we building right now in better lit rooms with cleaner paperwork, certain that this time the wall will be enough? That is the kind of question that does not close. It only deepens the longer you sit with it, the way the dark deepens the longer you drift past the edge of the maps. We will keep drifting out there together, into the systems the trade routes curve around, opening the boxes that no one else has the patience to reach. There is always another silence holding its breath. There is always another record waiting for a witness late enough to understand it.